Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 14, Communist Thought, M.N. Roy and E.M.S. Namboodiripad. And we start with topic M.N. Roy from Marxism to Radical Humanism. Manvendra Nath Roy, 1887 to 1954, whose original name was Narendra Nath Bhattacharya, had the unique distinction of having worked with Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin. He began his political life as a militant nationalist, believing in the cult of the bomb and the pistol and the necessity of armed insurrection. The futility of this path made him a socialist and then a communist. He joined the Communist International but was thrown out of it as he differed from its aim of being an movement all over the world. Roy passed through three phases of his career. In the first phase, which lasted up to 1919, he was a national revolutionary, smuggling arms for the terrorists of Bengal. In the second phase, Roy was a Marxist engaged in active communist movement, first in Mexico and then in Russia, China, and India. In the last and final phase, the Roy emerged as a radical humanist, completing his journey from nationalism to communalism and from communalism to radical humanism. He was in his student life a revolutionary as well as intellectual. He had a zest for new ideas and a quest for freedom. This is how he drifted from Marxism towards radicalism. Marxism and radicalism constitute the characteristics of his philosophy. Now let us discuss Roy's Marxism. Roy's baptism as a Marxist began in Mexico in 1917, where, along with Bosodin, he accepted Marxism as a philosophy for excellence. He accepted all the major tenets of Marxism and sought to interpret the Indian situation along Marxist lines. This is evident from the following. Roy submitted his thesis on colonial revolution at the Second Congress of the Communist International in 1920. To him, world capitalism was drawing its main strength of modern European capitalism, and so long as the latter was not deprived of this source of super profit, it would not be easy for the European working class to overthrow the capitalist order. Thus, he concluded that the revolutionary movement in Europe was absolutely dependent on the course of revolution in India and other Asian countries. In order to overthrow foreign capitalism, it was advisable to make use of the cooperation of the bourgeois nationalist elements, but only in the initial stages. The foremost task was to form a communist party to organize peasants and workers and lead them to revolution. If from the outset the leadership is in the hands of a communist vanguard, the revolutionary masses will be on the right road towards their goal, and they will gradually achieve revolutionary experience. Roy gave a Marxist interpretation to Indian history. Its main features were gradual decay of the rural economy, steady rise of capitalism, the conquest of India by the British bourgeoisie to capture new worker markets, to find new fields of exploitation and export of capital. The 1857 uprising was the last effort of the dethroned feudal potentates to regain their power. Indian National Congress was the organization of intellectual bourgeoisie to carry out their political struggle and to facilitate economic development. Colonial exploitation prevented the normal economic development of India, and the working class was too backward to fight for socialism. Roy does not identify Marxism with communism. Marxism is a philosophy while communism is a political practice. Roy believed in socialization of the process of production. When labor is performed collectively, its product must be collectively owned. Private property must cease to be an economic necessity before it can be abolished. Roy rejects the dictum that the dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary to achieve communalism. He believes that a revolution cannot be made to order. In an industry backward country like India, the establishment of proletariat dictatorship cannot be envisaged. In India, such a thing cannot happen, nor did he agree with the idea of withering away of the state. Roy foresaw two things in establishing socialism in India: an agrarian revolution and building up of modern industry under the control of a really democratic state. Roy did not consider socialism an immediate issue for India. Socialism was not a matter of desire for him. It was a matter of necessity. Socialism becomes a historical necessity when majority feels a necessity for it. The introduction of the mechanical means of production on a large scale, the abolition of pre capitalist restrictions on production, and the attainment of certain minimum economic level are the historic precondition for establishing socialism. A socialist India could not be built overnight. The problem of transition to socialism in India had two parts. First, achievement of free Indian democracy, and second, transformation of social order into a socialist democracy. Roy gave precedence to political freedom over economic freedom and socialism. The next point is humanist critique of Marxism. According to Roy, Marx's theory of class struggle has subordinated individual consciousness. He was also critical of Marx giving too much prominence to the working class. To him, polarization of capitalist society into the exploiting and the working class never takes place. The middle class does not disappear. It is the middle class which produces revolutionaries. Lenin recognized this fact but failed to recognize the middle class as a class. Thus, Roy denounced the theory of class struggle. Society could never survive without some kind of a social cohesive force, and as such, class struggle cannot be the only reality. Roy considered the proletariat as the most backward stratum of the society. He gave a place of pride to the middle class and the individual. He also denounced the theory of dictatorship of the proletariat, as this would establish totalitarianism. Revolutions cannot bring about miracles. What was needed was a judicious synthesis of rationalism and romanticism. As a radical humanist, he thought that revolution was to be brought about not through class struggle or armed violence, but through proper education. Revolution would not bring about any sudden change. He also did not agree with Marxian economic interpretation of history, as it had many flaws. For Roy, the biological urge of self-preservation preceded the economic motive of earning a livelihood. He criticized the Marxian dialectics. The evolution of democracy to socialism was a continuous process and not a dialectic process. Roy did not regard surplus value as a peculiar feature of capitalism. The creation of surplus value and the accumulation of capital were also necessary in a socialist society. The only difference between a socialist society unlike a capitalist society was that the surplus value was not appropriated by a particular class. Roy made a very serious observations about Indian polity. He remarked that the Indian traditions of leadership lend themselves to authoritarianism. Leader is considered infallible. The presence of a charismatic leadership indicates the fascist tendency in the Indian politics. One may agree with Roy that India lacks a democratic tradition and the existence of a particular social structure and the tendency to hero worship makes for authoritarian tradition. His warning about the fascist danger in the Indian politics has proved to be true. Roy feels that no country's interests are ever served or promoted by war. He welcomed the UN as a positive step towards world peace. He also suggested the idea of a world government because a world composed of nation states can never have peace. Roy's conception of peace was based on a humanist foundation. This can be attained through mutual trust and cooperation. It presupposes a unity of outlook and a community of interest among people without national and class differences. Reason and persuasion are the foundations on which lasting peace can be built. While discussing Roy's philosophy of new humanism, his approach to the radical democratic state in terms of a cooperative commonwealth has to be analyzed. This problem involved the reconciliation of the concept of direct democracy with the ideal of cooperative state. Roy was optimistic about it. He said, even in large political units and highly complex social organization of the modern world, direct democracy will be possible in the form of a network of small cooperative commonwealths. He envisaged its evolution through voluntary efforts. Its function would be subject to enlighten the public opinion and intelligent public actions. The idea is also based on the cooperative aspect of human nature. To achieve the democratic spirit and outlook, Roy emphasized on the education. Education for democracy consists in making the people conscious of their rights to exist as human beings in decency and dignity. It helps them to think and to exercise their rational judgment. This would also make democratic institutions vibrant, where universal suffrage is given. He did not agree with the state managed education as it creates a high degree of conformism and subservience to an established order. Roy also visualizes a polity in which economic democracy and political democracy support each other. He recognizes planning with freedom. Here we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.